Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode 230, and I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man. And of course, this footage is at 8 times speed. You can see the real-time footage with some ramblings attached on this week's episode of Under Construction. Anyways, this week we have a question by a guy named The All-Rounder on episode 205. And it was, if you get a chance, could you do an episode over the southern coast of Florida through Louisiana? Now, I will be honest here, and I will pull up the map for this one. I didn't ever go way down to the tip of Florida. The southernmost I got was I went to New Orleans for, I don't know, it may have been a week or so. Probably less, if I'm going to be honest. Before we had to evacuate due to a hurricane. Now, the stories that I talk about here are things that will get their own book, more or less, at some point in the future, ideally. But it's the kind of thing where I can't really fully describe these stories in a 15-minute period. So I'll leave them sort of as tidbits. Now, New Orleans being where it is, as many understand, is in a very bad spot for hurricanes. And there happened to be a very, very powerful one that came along right after we arrived. Now, we normally would know about this ahead of time. We were in very, very close collaboration through one of the only surviving major governmental organizations, and that would be NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Aeronautic Association. They handled all of the weather-related stuff that we sort of took information from, and we communicated with them, and we brought their people around, whether that be to work on instruments, to repair instruments, or just to get from place to place. There were a large number of reasons why we were picking up these scientists and carrying them all over the place, and usually, in some cases it was not even for NOAA, it was just for somebody that was maybe associated with NOAA, or someone that somebody in NOAA knew, and because of how much they helped us, they sort of maintained a radio network for us, which we could not do on our own. And we sort of perpetually owed them, at least I felt like. So they almost always rode for free, and whenever we could help them, we would, because they always would help us when we needed help. So, but they had their office in Atlanta sacked, and that was particularly bad for them. And this wasn't like their original office. It was something they had sort of co-opted a building. They'd taken a building over and were using it as an office, a monitoring place. It was out of the way. Atlanta wasn't really a safe city. Sorry. It wasn't really a safe city, not because of zombies necessarily, because there were some areas that were made safe from zombies, but they themselves were inhabited by these, well, to put it lightly, lunatics. And we came at odds with them, and they came at odds with us, and we had a little scuffle, and then I burned part of the city down. So, that was fun, and it wasn't fun because people died, and that's a story that that's far deeper and far more impactful than I can explain right now. There were a few people involved that had very close ties, either, not necessarily to me, but to each other, and we lost one of them, and and I had to live with that, and I dealt with that for a while, and there was this girl that ended up by my side. Instead, it's not like girl, like this woman, like this girl, like 9 years old, uh, and she sort of came to inhabit the train for a short period of time because of that. Uh, Her father was killed in Atlanta while we were there. He was with the train. And yeah. Then she went on to she went back to Noah after that. I keep in touch, but I don't really know where she is right now. I know she's still alive, which is good. But it's been a number of years. Anyways, that was Atlanta. That was my one experience in Atlanta, and I'm not really looking forward to going back ever. Apparently the place is a lot better than it was when we left it, which is good to hear. But no way am I doing anything substantial in Atlanta again. There's too many memories. Even New Orleans as well, although right now there's not much of New Orleans to go back to. At any rate, even after all these years, it's not like they certainly don't have the population like they did in 2005 after Katrina destroyed the city. They don't have the population to go back and rebuild. It's just not. It's not something they can do. So New Orleans, it still exists, but mostly on paper. Now, the other Gulf Coast cities, they're doing okay, especially the ones with major ports, like, Houston isn't bad, although the towns outside of Houston are the ones really living. Houston got hit pretty hard by zombies and then by infighting. It sort of devolved very quickly. And, and especially the more southerly cities being so close to Mexico. I believe I talked about how it was suddenly the only people with any real power were the cartels, and they used that power, and they started, they would move north, and they would come up into, like, Corpus Christi, and, and into San Antonio, and areas around there. They would, sort of pillage, I guess, but they were more, they were doing sort of like what the mob would do, just, money for, or, services, goods, for protection. That included protection against anybody, including myself, the train, and the U.S. military, which was a problem. It did save a lot of people, in Corpus Christi in particular, from zombies, which was really good for them. And they maintained as a stronghold, but not one that we could visit. It was one that we could not get close to, We went about, like, halfway there. I think there's a little town in there somewhere. That we went that far, realized how bad things were going to get, and sort of turned around and went back because it wasn't worth it. We did use it as a staging ground, not Corpus Christi, but the other town, as a staging ground to sort of head into Mexico and grab some steam engines, and then head out. That was always a fun adventure. It was that in San Antonio. San Antonio was contested. San Antonio was the kind of thing where the city was big enough that, A, they had a real zombie problem right away, which, obviously not good, of course. And then, immediately following that, you had the infighting, and then following that, you had the cartels coming in, and then you had all these little infighting groups that were otherwise completely, at odds with one another. Sorry, that's what I'm thinking of. And even most of them at odds with us, either because we associated with other people first, or just because they thought we were sort of encroaching. And so the zombie train wasn't involved in some of this, but we definitely heard plenty about it, because people, once the city got sort of cleared, at least semi-cleared, you had these flare-ups of zombies occasionally, but generally once World War Z started, it was tough to catch people off guard like that. People were usually not off guard. At any rate, the people from the neighboring towns and cities would end up flocking to San Antonio and then just get slaughtered in this violence that was going on there. Somehow, it wasn't like walk in and get shot. It was, most places in the city were relatively calm, and most places were even relatively prosperous. It was just every time there was a boundary of what people considered their land and other people's land, it was not pretty. It was not good at all. The infighting there got pretty bad, and then the cartels moved in, and then what happened was, all of a sudden, the cartels are in, people are banding together, trying to beat these guys back. And, you see a lot of this common enemy kind of stuff. And then at the same time, you get these tensions that are opening up. And then you've got the big bad, which is the cartels, and they take like half the city. We come down there, military shows up at some point, we try to push them out, ends up being basically a war zone. And that was a multiple thing affair. The army was holed up just to the north, and then they moved into like Austin, which isn't too far away, just because the capital is there, and it was relatively easy to clear. And then we got people coming into Austin to help fight the cartels, basically just working from the border, because there aren't other nearby towns except for Corpus Christi that are south. We managed to sever their lines, sever the highways, sever the railways up from Corpus Christi to San Antonio, and that slowed them down a lot because they had to come in from the other cities. But that lasted a while, and it was to the point where, we would go down there and we would help, and then we'd have other stuff we had to attend to. We couldn't, stay down there for crazy extended periods of time. It just wasn't feasible for the zombie train, and it wasn't our place to be. Now, I have some more time. I have a little bit more time. I don't want to run out of time. But as you go back along the coast the other direction, you just had, the stretch between New Orleans and Florida, or, the middle of Florida. The issue with that is that there are so many drawbridges over there. Some of them were left up, some of them were washed out. And then Florida itself just was in a bad spot. There wasn't a lot of local resistance in Florida, and so there wasn't really much for us there on top of everything else, and the population was just obliterated. It was heavily infested. It felt like the whole state was. There were always rumors of Disney stronghold, and that's sort of a fun thing to think about, but I never saw any real evidence of that happening. I know that there were a few people holed up in places around the park, but when it comes down to it, the park is not a place that you can really, really make into a real livable place, because they get, even during their heyday, even before World War Z, it was, you bring supplies in every day. You bring truckloads and truckloads and truckloads of supplies. They don't make any of their own stuff. It's not like a plantation or, even like a prison where you can have areas to grow stuff or, whatever. It was, it was as much a real jungle as it was a concrete one, and the fact that it was built like a story up and there's the whole subterranean level made it really interesting at first. Then it would become problematic. And this is something I've heard from people that tried to live there. It would become really problematic because you had other ways for zombies to get in, and then, the lack of maintenance. It's a place that needs a lot of maintenance. So, anyways, if you want more specific stuff, feel free to write a comment about it. I'll be happy to oblige. We've got plenty in the backlog, so I won't get to it right away, but know that I've read it and I put it in the list. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next week. Trainman out. I'm a little bit early on this one. Give it a second. Trainman out.